Theresa May, the Prime Minister. Welcome, Prime Minister. You are announcing today this great repeal bill. Can you start off by explaining to people exactly what it means?
Yes, I mean, when the United Kingdom joined the European Union, of course, legislation was passed, the European Communities Act, which enshrined that relationship that we have as a member of the European Union. What we're doing with the Great Repeal Bill, what we will be doing, is repealing that European Communities Act. That means that the United Kingdom will be an independent sovereign nation. It'll be making its own laws.
I can't quite work out, I'm scratching my head a little bit, is this a statement of the blindingly obvious? In other words, we know we're leaving the EU, we know that at that point EU law ceases to apply to us, and this has to be done, but is it such a big deal, really?
Well, I think it's an important measure that we're taking, it's an important step we're taking, because, first of all, it makes it very clear to the British people who voted for us to leave the EU, that is exactly what we will be doing. Secondly, it gives that greater degree of clarity about the sort of timetables that we're following. And crucially, if I may just, Andrew, it's important for us to set this out now so that we have the timing, so that when we leave the European Union, there's a smooth transition. I think that's important for us all, but particularly important, obviously, for the economy and for business.
But does this mean that all of those European laws people have been complaining about for years, about bananas and sausages and how we insulate our houses, all of those become British laws?
What will happen is we will take European law into UK law. Then because we will then be independent and sovereign in relation to this, we will be able to decide on those laws. Parliament will be able to decide whether we wish to change those or keep those laws. And I think it's important to bring that body of law into UK law because, of course, it's that, for example, that protects workers' rights, and that's very important.
But a lot of MPs, I can see them looking at this and saying, well, actually, rather than incorporating this thing about bananas, whatever it is, into UK law, I'd like to change it. Are you sure you'll be able to get this bill through the House of Commons?
This is an important step in ensuring that we leave the European Union. Parliament gave the decision to the British people. Parliament voted 6-1 to give the British people the choice as to whether to stay in the EU or leave. The people voted. They want us to leave. This is an important step, and we in terms of getting this through, I think it's important that we have this in place by the time we leave the European Union, so there's a smooth transition, so workers know that their rights are protected, so businesses know where they stand. Then, as a sovereign nation, we'll be able to make our laws and determine whether we want to change them.
It just seems to me, in terms of the brutal politics, there are lots of opposition MPs who, for their own reason, might want to vote this down, and there are a lot of Tories on the so-called soft Brexit argument who might want to vote it down. You may well not be able to get this through, and if you can't, isn't that the trigger for another general election? I know you've been through this, we've been talking about this before. But
Well, Andrew, let's just look at, as I've just said, when Parliament voted for a referendum on staying in the European Union, Parliament voted 6-1 to say to the British people, this is your choice. We're going to ask you this question. You give us your voice. The British people have determined that we will leave the European Union, and I think anybody who's looking at this repeal bill, which will repeal the European Communities Act, will make us that independent sovereign nation once again, able to determine our own laws. Anybody looking at that should remember that this is about delivering for the British people, and to me, it's not just about leaving the EU, it's about that essential question of the trust that people can have in their politicians. The people have spoken, we will deliver on that.
But again, to kind of ventriloquise MPs, some of them may say, but hold on a second, Prime Minister, we have no idea at all what kind of Brexit you're taking us to. We don't know what this journey is going. Why should we give you a blank cheque before you set out on it?
Well, of course, we'll be starting the negotiations once we've triggered Article 50 and going through that process. But I think it's important, as we go through that process of negotiation, I want to get the right deal for the British people. I'm optimistic about the opportunities that are available to the UK when we're outside the European Union. We want the right deal for our continuing relationship with countries and with inside the EU and with the EU itself. But we're not going to it's not right to give a running commentary or to set out at every stage what our negotiating hand is, because you don't get a good deal if that's how you approach it.
I understand that, but you used the word negotiations there. Do we actually need negotiations with the EU?
Well, I think we want to negotiate with them what the relationship will be. Life is going to be different in the future. Once we leave the EU, we'll be in a different position. We will be that independent country, but crucially, we want still to have a good relationship with countries inside the European Union and with the European Union itself. That's important for our economy, it's important for jobs here in the UK, it's important for us to be able to continue to work with them on issues around dealing with crime and security.
The reason I ask the question is that there are some of your own MPs, Bernard Jenkin and others, who say we actually don't need a negotiation. Article 50 will trap us in an endless, very difficult and presumably sometimes rather humiliating series of talks. And actually all we need to do now is say, listen, we're not going to put tariffs on your goods coming in. We don't expect you to put tariffs on our goods going to you. Take it or leave it. Goodbye.
Well, of course, the process of leaving the European Union is quite complex. We've got to look at a whole range of issues in terms of getting...
Is my question, really. Must it be complex?
There is complexity in our relationship with the European Union at the moment. I think we owe it to people here in the UK in terms of their jobs, in terms of the protection of workers here in the UK. I think we owe it to businesses, people who want to invest in the United Kingdom for the future, to actually ensure that we get the right deal for trade in goods and services. And I think that's about sitting down with the European Union. It's not just about what we want. I think we want a strong EU. It's in our interest to have that strong EU we can continue to trade with. They have an interest in being able to trade with us. That's the way we'll get the right deal for Britain.
Now, you say no running commentary, and all commentators, gasp at that and think how depressing. But actually, much more importantly, people who are making big investment decisions, most recently Nissan, say they can't decide whether or not to invest more money in new factories and products and produce jobs in Britain until they know, roughly speaking, where you're going. Aren't you in danger by not giving any kind of commentary about which kind of exit you want to actually starving Britain of investment?
Well, there's actually a difference between not giving any commentary and giving a running commentary. I mean, what I'm doing today, what I'm doing today is setting out some further detail on the timing and the way we're going to approach this whole question, and of course the Great Repeal Bill. That will give people greater clarity. So when I think it's right to be talking about the approach we're taking, we of course will do that. But everybody assumes commentators want to have a sort of day by day.
No.
What is it you're talking about now? How you're going to get this?
We will
and so
learn
forth.
at moments.
That's the wrong way to deal with a negotiation.
Now, you used an excellent word just now. You talked about timing, which allows me to ask again about the timing of triggering Article 50. Boris Johnson has suggested maybe early next year, kind of January, February. Donald Tusk has suggested he thinks the same thing. Are they right?
Well, as you know, I've been saying that we wouldn't trigger it before the end of this year,
yes,
so that we get some preparation in place. But yes, I mean, I will be saying in my speech today that we will trigger before the end of March next year.
So that's a reasonably brisk trigger. And at that point, we have 2 years to conclude these negotiations.
That's what the process within the treaty says, yes.
So once we trigger, once you send your letter, say, right, I'm now triggering Article 50, what then happens?
Well, it's for the European Union. The remaining members of the EU, have to decide what the process of negotiation is. I hope, and I'll be saying to them, that now that they know what our timing is going to be, it's not an exact date, but they know it'll be in the first quarter of next year, that we'll be able to have some preparatory work so that once the trigger comes, we have a smoother process of negotiation. I think this is important. It's not just important for the UK, it's important for Europe as a whole, that we're able to do this in the best possible way so we have the least disruption for businesses. You were talking about investors earlier in your questions, and when we leave the EU we have a smooth transition away from the EU.
Can I ask about Parliament itself, because all of this is about making Parliament sovereign, and yet at the moment it suggests that we're going to go through this negotiation and the most important talks probably this country has had for generations, without Parliament being told what's going on. Surely if Parliament is sovereign, then Parliament at least needs to know stage by stage what is happening.
Well, first of all, of course, Parliament will be involved in this process. The Great Repeal Bill that we've just been talking about, Parliament will be having its say on that. And of course, at various stages, we will be keeping Parliament informed. As I've just said, this is not about keeping silent for 2 years, but it's about making sure that we are able to negotiate, that we don't set out all the cards in our negotiation, because as anybody will know who's been involved in these things, if you do that up front, or if you give a running commentary, you don't get the right deal. And what I'm determined to do is to get the right deal for Britain.
The argument kind of running through the Conservative Party here in Birmingham is about the nature, obviously, of the exit that we negotiate. And I know the soft and hard thing is irritating jargon, but nonetheless nevertheless, there is a truth there. There are some people who say the most important thing is to keep markets open, keep tariff-free markets open. That will require a very detailed negotiation, and we might have to concede stuff, even on the free movement of people, to allow that to happen. And there are other people who say absolutely no. We turn our back on the EU. In effect, we say take it or leave it, and we go out and make our way in the world, and we have an absolute blanket ban on the free movement of people from the rest of the EU. Can you give me any indication in which direction you personally are tending?
Well, first of all, when the vote took place on the 23rd of June, I think, apart from the message of leaving the European Union, I think there was also a clear message from the British people that they wanted us to control movement of people from the EU coming into the UK. So we will deliver on that. But I don't look at it in the sort of terms that you've set out. The way I look at this is that we want to negotiate what we believe will be the right deal for the British people, the right deal for Britain when we leave the EU. That's about negotiating on things like trading in goods and services and making sure we get that good deal. So I don't look at it as, is it a this model or a that model? I say, let's actually sit down and say, what is going to be right for the UK? Let's go out and get it.
But to be clear, let's talk about migration in particular. I can remember having a discussion with you when you were Home Secretary.
I think we had quite a few discussions on migration,
I could
Andrew.
feel you seething with frustration because I kept saying you can't control the number of people going in, and at that point you couldn't. But are you clear that after the vote, people want a complete control? So you are able to say, as Prime Minister, nobody comes in, or actually it benefits us to get 70,000 engineers or whatever it might be in. But the control will be definitely in Parliament, and there will be an absolute end to the free movement of people in all circumstances across the EU.
What people want is to know that the government is able to decide who can come into and set the rules for who can come into the country. That's what's important. People's frustration was that we were able to do that for people coming into the UK from outside the European Union, but not for people coming from inside the European Union. Now, there's a number of ways in which you can do that, and we need to look at what is going to be best for the UK. But the important point is to have rules that are set by the government. So it's the UK government who determines, and the UK government who is ensuring that we have that control.
And so for people watching who might be involved in universities or parts of the NHS or scientific research establishments or car manufacturing or whatever it is, and they're thinking, I need some more people in, I need to know that I'm going to get the skilled workers I need. Some kind of work permit system might be a way forward.
Well, we will look at the various ways in which we can bring in the control that the British people want, and ensuring that, as we have been in our immigration policy generally, that the brightest and best can come to the UK. But you mentioned the word skills there, Andrew, and that, of course, lights up another issue, which is why it is, over the years in the UK, that we haven't been skilling up people here in the UK to take on these jobs, and to ensure, I want to ensure that we have a society where everyone can go as far as their talents can take them.
Just before we get to society, one last question. How important is it to you that the British industry and commerce has tariff-free access to the single market?
I want the right deal for trades in goods and services. And what we're doing at the moment, what David Davis and his department have been doing, is listening to businesses here in the UK, listening to different sectors, finding out what it is that they find that is most important to them. I've been doing that. I've been sitting down with British businesses, big and small. I've also listened to investors in the UK. When I was in the United States a couple of weeks ago, I sat down with some US investors. I sat down with companies, people representing companies from America that are here in the UK providing jobs in the UK. We're listening to people as to what it is that they think is most important for them.
But to be absolutely clear, this process starts, Article 50 is triggered by the end of March.
By the end of March next year.
Right, let's move on.